I was a senior in high school, and Langston Hughes came to give a reading for our school assembly. And I was really bowled over by his poetry. I had not met a professional poet before in my life. I was 17, 18 years old. And his poetry was something that I could understand. It was written in the vernacular, which I was familiar with because I grew up in New York from the age of 9. And after the reading, I bought, squandered my lunch money and I bought his book. There was a little pile of books on the table, and I bought it, and I still have it to this day. One Way Ticket, it's called. And I read through it. I just loved that poetry, and it got me on a different track, because I'd only studied poetry in high school. We were doing Eliot's Wasteland, and I was struggling with that because, at 17, 18, I don't think one appreciates all the notes and the paraphernalia that go along with that poem. And I was a little bit, how shall I say, I was struggling, in that class when we were going through the Wasteland. And to me, it wasn't what poetry meant. When I was a teenager, younger than 17 or 18, this was when I was about 14 or so, I started reading Edgar Allan Poe, and that meant something to me. I mean, it wasn't fashionable or anything like that. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about my individual development. And I loved Edgar Allan Poe. It's the poetry that I could really relate to and understand. And then when Langston Hughes came along, that confirmed the kind of poetry that reached me emotionally, because the Wasteland did not at that time. I mean, I came to appreciate it later in life. Let's put it that way. So that is the early event that helped to shape me. It got me onto the that part of American poetry which William Carlos Williams represented, and later on the objectivist poets, but that came much later. William Carlos Williams, to me, was what had a relationship with Langston Hughes, in the sense they were both quite direct. They were, I won't say simple, because they weren't. They were complex. They used humor. They used irony. They used description. They were very focused on the everyday, on the quotidian. And that meant a lot to me, because it's something that I felt that I could do as a writer. And that came a little bit later. I started writing actually when I was 11 years old. I illustrated on slides, on these little transparent slides that they had in those days, and I made up a story to go along with them. And that was when I was 11 years old. So, I mean, I started pretty early. We read anti-war poems, or poems that had to do with the negative feelings that we had about the war. They were very strong, and a bunch of us got together. I remember Paul Blackburn organized it. Paul Blackburn was a mentor to me. He was a little bit older the generation of Robert Creeley and Allen Ginsberg and people like that. So a little bit earlier generation. And Paul Blackburn was a very, very strong influence on me when I was, this is after college. And after I came out of the Army as a draftee, by the way. And so anyway, we organized, or he organized this, the protest of the flatbed truck, and we had a loudspeaker. And we went through Harlem, I remember, and they leaned out of the windows, you know, the ladies, and they were leaning out of the windows and they were clapping as we went by and cheering. And it was really gratifying. The other part, though, of that protest took place in front of the United Nations building. And that was really scary. What happened is that we were part of a protest whereby we lay down on the road in front of the building, the UN building, and that was part of the protest until the police came by with these, what seemed to us, enormous horses, you know, and they came at us. So we had to get up real quick so that we wouldn't be trampled on. That was quite scary. But I don't know if we made the point with the protest, but let me say that our protest was not unique. I mean, this was going on all over America at the time, you know, the protest against the war in Vietnam. And so we were just part of that. I was there for a couple of years running a poetry workshop. And it was so successful that I decided to start the Aspen Writers Workshop, which was not only poetry, but also fiction and playwriting. And my two colleagues, Toby Olson and Eddie Pomerantz, started this program, which was a series of workshops and readings that took place by guest poets. I mean, Robert Creeley came out, Paul Blackburn came out, Donald Barthelme, the short story writer, he came out. All kinds of people from James Ngugi, as he was then, who was now really quite a famous African novelist. He came out. The director of the Iowa Writers Workshop, Paul, oh, wow, I can't remember his last name. He came out. So we had a lot of people, a lot of guest poets and writers, as well as the permanent staff. And it was a series of workshops. We met outdoors when we could. We took over a number of buildings for accommodation. And it was a 9 to 10 week summer workshop. It was fantastic, and it ran for 3-4 years in the 1960s. And of course, Aspen at that time, because I think it's really changed since then, but at that time there were other things that were going on, like the Aspen Institute for Humanistic Studies, which was a program for usually businessmen to get their cultural batteries recharged, so to speak. And there were artists and writers and poets who came in as speakers and facilitators to do this. And I took part in that also. They invited me to do that. And the other part of Aspen, very, very important was the Aspen Music Festival, which played under this enormous tent in the summertime, of course, which was very appropriate. And it was a full orchestra, plus soloists and chamber music, which went extended through the whole week. So you had concerts during the weekend. You had chamber music. You had soloists from all over the world. Okay, and very prominent, in some cases, very prominent composers. I mean, like Benjamin Britten and Darius Milhaud and people like that. So that was a very important part of what Aspen was at that time. Yeah. One of the, I'll tell you a little story. One of the poets there, Jonathan Williams, who was American, he organized with Klaus Oldenburg, the artist. I think he died. Yeah, I think he's no longer living. They organized a baseball game with the musicians, the artists, and the writers. Okay, the writers and some of the artists were against the musicians, and the baseball bat was a soft bat that Klaus Oldenburg created. I don't know if you know about Klaus Oldenburg, but he was famous for his soft sculpture. And he created this soft baseball bat. And if you think that was easy to hit a baseball with, you are mistaken, because it was very hard. And that was a hell of a lot of fun, I must say. I mean, really. So it was opportunities like that to get together with the artists and the writers and the musicians that made it such an incredibly vigorous atmosphere. You know, it was really quite marvelous. And the workshops, as I say, they took place all week, and met outside under. There was quite a bit of vacant land in those days. We're talking 1965, 66, 67. And Aspen wasn't the big, millionaires place that it is now. I mean, there were millionaires there, yeah, but it wasn't like it is now. It was, there were vacant old miners' houses that had fallen into semi-ruin. It was, the streets were not paved, they were oiled, and not like it is today. So it was a very different kind of place, and very culturally alive and stimulating. That's the kind of place it was. This came through a Michigan poet called Dan Gerber, and you know the family, I think. And Dan asked me to come out to Thomas Jefferson and give, I think the original thing was to give a reading there, which I was happy to do. And while I was there, I mean, I got along very well with them. And they asked me if I would like to come out there and teach. Now, I don't know how much you know about Thomas Jefferson College in those days, but it was a very experimental college, okay? And every candidate who came to teach had to be okayed by the students, not only the faculty and not only the administration, which was mainly the dean at that time. And so I came back again and appeared before the student body at a meeting, and I just talked, and I read my poetry, and I said what I believed I could do as an instructor there, as a teacher there. and how I felt that poetry ought to be experienced. I talked along those lines, and then I read some of my own poetry, and basically that was it. And they asked me to come back and teach there, so I did. Well, the idea actually arose out of that meeting that I had with the students before I was even hired. I said, one of the things that I would like to do, if it's possible, is run a poetry festival here. I said, look, we're roughly in the middle of the country. It's a great position, you know, as far as America goes, to get stuff from the West Coast and the East Coast and in between. And I said, you know, I'd like to do something like that if the opportunity will present itself. So that's how it arose. Now, the first festival, the 1971, was built around a number of poets. It was built around a Black American representation. I wouldn't say built around. I would say that the Black American representation was a very important part of it. Now, this goes back, obviously, as you can imagine, to my meeting with Langston Hughes all those years ago. Plus the fact that the school I went to, Elizabeth Irwin High School in New York City, was a very progressive and enlightened school. It was very, very socially conscious. It was very anti-racial. It was very inclusive. But the important thing about it was its the importance of developing a social consciousness, and in a progressive, it was very progressive. It was not at all conservative in that respect. Anyway, so I came from that kind of high school background, which was very important to me, and that was one of the reasons that the other reason was that Black representation in conferences and poetry conferences and festivals, Black representation was very scarce in those days. It was white run, and it concentrated on white poets to the detriment of Black Americans. And that it seemed to me that this needed remedying, and therefore the first festival, it included Sonia Sanchez, Dudley Randall, Tom Weatherly, David Henderson. I wanted people from the East Coast as well as the West Coast and people in between. So the people in between, Donald Hall and Robert Bly and people like that. And on the West Coast, Philip Whelan, he came at the last minute and left a very, very nice reaction to the festival. He thought it was terrific. And then from the East Coast, a representation of more, I guess you'd say, more avant-garde people, okay? So that was the first festival. The second festival in 1973 was built around the objectivists and those who were influenced by the objectivists. All the poets who were there. I can say that all of them, I think, engaged with the students in different ways. We're sitting around in one of the outside areas, of which there were, maybe still are, many at Grand Valley. I don't know if they're still there and set up the way they're set up, which was a very beautiful way to hear the workshop leader and to talk about poetry. But then there were many opportunities during the day, the afternoons, and the evenings when people got together and simply talked. Maybe students would come up and show their poems, and we'd talk about their poetry. We would talk about poetry generally. There was a lot of opportunity there, not only in the more formal events like the readings that took place in the evenings, but also at other times in the early evening and then late in the evening over coffee. They had a coffee machine in the dorms, so people could get together, and it was so that was a real mixture of the formal and the informal contact. It was that kind of place and circumstance where nobody felt uptight, about contacting people. I mean, you'd come up to somebody famous like Allen Ginsberg, and he would always stop and talk to them. It was the same thing with Paul Blackburn. They crowded around Paul Blackburn. He had a reputation, especially among people from the East Coast, of being very generous with his time. And many students, many poets and would-be poets clustered around him in the first festival. He died just a few months later. If you see pictures of him there, he's very gaunt and very haggard, and it didn't last very long after that. And they would crowd around him, and he would sort of hold court, but also in a very meaningful way, not to chit chat, but to talk about their poems, to give advice about publication and about developing their poetry. Most of the people there were very generous with their time. I mean, most of the invited poets. That was what the whole thing was about, to make the experience meaningful to these people. There's this man, Steve Oxenfield. He's from Benton Harbor. I must express my appreciation for the festival at Grand Valley in June. It was a great experience to meet and talk with all the, quote, famous persons and to meet new people who write poetry. Through the festival, I was fortunate enough to gain some new friends in various parts of the country with whom I remain in contact. Grand Valley appears to be a pretty exciting place with many creative opportunities. I consider it an extreme pleasure to have met me and my wife. Okay, that's something else. But that's the kind of response, they were turned on by this whole experience. And many of these people continue to write poetry and to publish, and, which is really nice to know. That's the kind of response, in other words. But it's due to the combination of workshops, readings, seminars, informal contacts that lasted, late at night sometimes. I've got several books here. This book was published while I was in Michigan, actually, at Thomas Jefferson, I mean. I'll read a book, poems. This book is called Speech Acts and Happenings. That's the book. It's not in print now. You can get it on Amazon. This is called Through the Automatic Car Wash. Through the automatic car wash, windows closed, water zinging on metal, the windshield fogging, the moving tread gives us the idea of moving through a summer thunder shower in Missouri at 10 miles an hour, windshield fogging, hailstones banging on the hood, darkness settling on us, and the giant roller brushes thundering down make my son say, "I don't like this," and I switch on the overhead light. That's one of them. I have some very short ones called Sijo. That's a Korean form which I learned about when I was editing a book for the Asia Society of Sijo, written by a Korean. And when I was editing it, I thought it was really great form. It's in 3 lines, which are usually cut in half in the English versions. And it's based on syllabics, meaning there's a syllable count, 45, 47, around there. That's the basis of the metrics. Auto Sijo. I am moved, fully powered. R&H, body like new, runs good. Good rubber, push button transmission, accomplishes infinite changes, getting me around the bend. Reasonable. Oh yeah, hermit crab, Sijo. Where is that place where the home is he is? The hermit crab, cold wanderer and perennial burrower, never building and always moving in or moving out, finding the fit. I take my son at 2 through the glass house. The pitchman promises, you'll see, he'll go for it. They all do. Inside, I see you don't, but amaze the mirror, misdirection. So I carry you before tears start in 100 eyes. That gives you an idea about some of the early poems. This one was published quite recently. This is called Black Book. The subtitle is An Assemblage of the Fragmentary. And it was published here in the UK. It's a collaboration between the British artist Julia Farah and me, and the illustrations are abstract. They look like that. That's what they look like. It's a protest volume, okay? And it has a number of experimental poems, which I'm not going to read you. I'll read Stalker. Stalker is illustrated like that. That's the kind of abstract illustration that it contains. She's a very notable and terrific artist. So this is called Stalker. Say, I'm very interested in you. Say, you're also interesting to the government. Say, the government becomes interested in me because I'm very interested in you. Say, you're not interested in the government being interested in you, but you may be interested in me. Say the government is stalking you. Say we don't know the government is stalking you. Say the government is stalking me because they're stalking you. And because the government knows how interested I am in you. Say the fact the government is stalking you is leaked. Say, I learned the government is also stalking me. Say, we're both more interested in the government now the government is stalking us. Say, we ask the government to put a stop to this. Say the government says they'll put a stop to this because although they're very interested in us, they know how upsetting it may be for us. Say the government continues stalking us, although they know how upsetting it is for us. Say we ask the government again to put a stop to this. Say the government puts a stop to us. Protest poem. And it has to do, obviously, and this was done in the date, I'm just reminding myself, 2016. But it has, you know, I was reacting to the fact that because of digital means because of the digital age and the opportunities it gives to not only the government, but, you know, large organizations like Facebook and you know, online organizations to abuse the data that they collect from us. That's the background for this kind of poem. And the other poem that I'll read from this book is one that was written originally because the church that we go to, Maggie and I, St. James's Piccadilly, it's a Christopher Wren church, by the way, not that that makes any difference. They had an event, Christmas time, whereby they constructed a wall in front of the church to symbolize the wall that divides Bethlehem. And this wall stayed up for, I don't know, what, 11 or 12, 14 days, something like that. And I wrote a poem that goes that went in front of the wall. It was a big poster poem. And this is called Every Wall Has Two Sides. Okay, I'll read it. Let us consider the forming of walls. The mortar of words I use to form my walls, to make my side a better side. The other side is where the other side resides. I'm on the right side, and you're not. The side you're on is undesirable, and my side is right, because I am right and you are wrong. You disturb my side with your words. Your words spread fear, and mine bind my wall with the mortar of reason. You're unreasonable. You disturb me, raise unreasonable demands about your side, your living space, my living space, which is mine by right. Yours, which is not yours by right. You have no right to be where you are because I am here. And because I am here, you cannot be. You cannot be. You're on my other side, the other side of me. That's the first one. And the second one, every wall has two sides. I didn't know I was on a side until a wall was built. And then I knew I was on a side, the wrong side. I didn't know I'd created a disturbance until you told me I was creating a disturbance. So then I decided to create a disturbance because you told me I lived on the wrong side. I'd always lived on this side, even though I didn't know it was a side of anything, much less the wrong one. It's wrong because my side is a wall of shadows, the shadow side, the wrong side. I shadow you who live on the light side. I'm a disturbance for each one of you. I am a shadow. I form a wall within you. Although you cannot see me, I will disturb you. I am here. I am here. I will never leave you. You're on my other side, the other side of me. Okay, so that's two poems from this book. As I say, this is a real protest book. There's a lot of anger in here, and quite a few chance poems also. And this other book is called Still Life. Okay, and this is a collection of work from the past 10 years or so, beginning, the book was published in 2010, okay? And I will read a poem from here, and then we'll see how things go. Conjugal Love Poem, page 28. Okay. My conjugal love poem is a villanelle, and I don't usually write in strict forms. I mean, the Sijo is strict. That's pretty strict, but it's. There's a little note here. I started this poem by turning the platitude "nothing is as it seems" on its head, because I felt Howard Hodgkin, the painter, was being playfully ironical by calling his painting realism. What is real, he appears to be saying, is what I think or paint it as being real. I call this poem Conjugal Love Poem because two people in a long-lasting close relationship may accept diversity as contributing to rather than detracting from their affinity. The traditional regularity of the form of villanelle does not accord with what the poem is saying. Another instance of the paradox I see in the painting by Howard Hodgkin. Conjugal love poem. What you see is not the way I see. What I see is just the way things are. Everything is always as it seems. What color are these trousers? You say they're gray. I say they're green. What you say, what you see, is not the way I see. Whether blue or black, rough or smooth, against the grain or uniform, everything is always as it seems. Let's shelve our books alphabetically. No, you say, by size for harmony. What you see is not the way I see. We've lived together, you and I, for years of harmonious disparity, for everything is always as it seems. And that's the way I'd rather have it. Let's embrace our incongruity. Or not. What you see is not the way I see. Everything is always as it seems. It's certainly important because of just about all the arts. If you compare it with painting, for example, which I know more about because I not only collect art, but I've collaborated with a number of artists. If you compare it with art, if you have some success, let's put it that way, is very remunerative. Okay. I mean, you think of somebody like Damien Hirst or somebody like that, or Tracy Emin. Anyway, whereas it's not possible for 99% of poets or 98% of poets to live just by their poetry. There are only a very few who are able to do that. Now, obviously, Allen Ginsberg is one of them. And Robert Bly taught for quite a while before he gave it up and decided to live by his writing. And that was Robert Bly. And there are very few people who can do that. Therefore, the importance of grants and philanthropy takes on added importance. And it's not only, I should say this, not only for the young poet, for the poet who's just beginning to come into his or her own. It's also for poets in their 40s or 50s or even 60s who have not achieved the recognition that was possible and who have, on the basis of their work, have a great deal to offer, but can't do it because they have a day job that exhausts them and prevents them from doing what they would love to do, that is to say, write poetry. So even for older people, the importance of grants and patronage, as we used to call it, either government patronage or private or corporate patronage is really important. Now, festivals such as the ones I ran are an opportunity for poets not only to gather together, but also they get paid. So that means something. It helps to confirm, when you have a poet, I don't know, like Philip Whalen, who was, I think, in his 50s when he came. He was West Coast poet when he came to the festival. It's important for somebody like Philip Whalen, who may not have been a household name at that time. He became very well known as a West Coast poet of the West Coast school. It was important for him to be recognized, to be paid, to come and to contribute his knowledge about poetry and his own poetry. Somebody like Gary Snyder is another person who can live by his writing. But as I say, they're very, very few indeed. And Gary is, because of his extremely modest requirements in terms of living standards and the way he lives, he can just about manage. He also has received grants for here and there, but he can just about manage. So yes, grants and philanthropy, etc., are very significant in terms of the life of the poet. After Grand Valley, I was supposed to be there. The original arrangement, Thomas Jefferson, was for me to be there for 2 years. And they wanted me to do an extra year. They asked me to do that. And that was, so I said, yeah. And that's when the, excuse me, that's when the 1973 festival occurred. And I left Grand Valley then in the summer of 74. So I was there from 71 through 74. What came next is we moved lock, stock, and barrel. We moved to England, to London. I was on a grant from the New York State Council on it was the New York State Council, but administered through the national program on the arts. So I had a grant that enabled us to live. And then a year later, I answered an ad in the New Statesman for the position of the General Secretary of the Poetry Society. And I got the job. That experience was, let me put it this way, it was not soul destroying, but pretty damn close to it. And I thought that, since I had all this organizational experience in America, that I would be able to contribute what talents I had to the running of this organization. What I had not figured on was the virulent hatred between the two opposing camps in this society. One, the avant-garde, progressive, new British poetry, the British Poetry Revival, as it was called, and the other, the conservatives, the traditionalists, the people who hated what the avant-garde was doing. And I was caught in the middle, right? Bam, bam, bam. I was the executive, the paid executive, and it was my job to facilitate the operation of the Poetry Society. Well, I did that for just under 3 years before my nerves gave out and I quit. My sympathies, I guess from what I've been talking about, so it must be obvious to you, my sympathies were with the avant-garde people. And when they walked out of the Poetry Society en masse in protest, there's a long story to this, and it's all dealt with in a book called The Poetry Wars. But when they left, a few weeks later, when I could, I handed in my resignation. So that was one thing. And then I went back into teaching. I taught for Antioch University. They had a program, a graduate program in London, Antioch University in where's that, Ohio, isn't it? Anyway, they had a graduate program in London, and I worked for them for a while. And then after that, I worked for the University of Maryland in their European division. And I was doing general teaching there. I was teaching theater and American literature, American poetry, all kinds of stuff. And then I did that, and then I retired from that. So here I am. Before retiring completely, I worked for the Poetry School, which was founded just a year or two before I joined. I joined in 2003, and I taught for 13, no, I didn't. I taught for 15 years for them, running a poetry seminar and courses, courses in American poetry and experimental poetry, poetry and visual art, chance poetry, all kinds of courses for them, as well as running seminars. I did that for 14 years or so, and then I retired from that. So that was the latest thing I did, and that was very rewarding indeed. I really liked that.